When I was a child, the most popular television program about films was the Barry Norman Film Show. I remember watching one particular episode of Film 1975 because it left a very big influence on me. I remember at the time thinking that Barry Norman, unlike myself, was no big fan of horror films. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe he loved horror films, but he always gave the impression that he felt they were subpar, that they weren't proper films, that they weren't French, that they weren't erotic in the right way. Anyway, the point is that this particular episode of film 1975, or maybe it was just film 75, was there was a review of the film Shivers, David Cronenberg's Shivers, and I felt that the main purpose of this review, from Barry Norman's point of view, was to thoroughly denounce this film as something that one shouldn't go and see unless you were some kind of masochist. In order to prove his point, he showed this scene in which Barbara Steele, the great 60s icon of horror films, Italian horror films especially, took a bath with a glass of wine. Never a wise thing to do. And this is what happened to her. Now, as bizarre as it might seem, given that obviously I am not Barbara Steele and I don't share her general biology, I spent the next year or so quite terrified of taking a bath without being thoroughly sure that the plug was plugged in. I always felt that something might come sneaking up that plug hole, even though in actuality British plugs have a kind of, not a mesh, but a blocking structure, whereas no parasite could come up through the plug hole. But it was something that was always on my mind, something I could never quite get over. Now the thing is that over the years, and when I finally saw the film, I didn't find it anywhere near as terrifying as Barry Norman had implied that I might. Over the years, I've actually come to see Shivers as less of a horror film and more of a very strange meditation on the sexual nature of human beings and how we tend to propel ourselves into the world hiding our true feelings and hiding our true proclivities, our true sense of sexuality at least. And this is something that actually Shivers deals with very well. The story, for those of you who are not familiar with the film, deals with a mad professor. His name is Hobbs. We don't know very much about him except that at the beginning of the film he cuts what appears to be a schoolgirl open and pours acid inside her stomach before slicing his own throat. Now this is quite a shocking set of imagery for me. Even when I eventually saw the film, it seemed very unusual that you'd have a scene like this. And yet, as the film progresses, you have clear scenes of horror and blood and lots of disgusting elements, which I think everybody is probably aware of by now, because Shivers was like the first film of its kind that had things going inside of your mouth and taking you over, or going up any other orifice. Anyway, the point is that the reason that Hobbes does this is that he has a philosophy. He believes that man is an animal who thinks too much, an over-rational animal who has lost touch with his body and his instincts. In other words, he has too much brain and not enough guts. So Hobbs has this brilliant idea, or had this brilliant idea, because, you know, by the main action of the film he's already dead. He had the idea of creating a parasite that was a combination of aphrodisiac and venereal disease that would hopefully turn the world into one beautiful, mindless orgy. Now, it all sounds very 60s, all like one big great loving. But Cronenberg always had that Balladian eye. He loves those desolate-looking apartment buildings, and that's the main character in Shivers, is this apartment building. And of course, he also loves atavism, and he later went on to make Crash, a version of Ballard's infamous novel, which became an even more infamous film. But Shivers itself, as it progresses beyond horror, and it becomes something, well, it plays into Hobbes's philosophy. After being infected by the parasite, Forsyth, the character played by Lynn Lowry, delivers the following dialogue.
Roger, I had a very disturbing dream last night. In this dream, I found myself making love to a strange man. Only I'm having trouble, you see, because he's old and dying. And he smells bad, and I find him repulsive. But then he tells me that everything is erotic, that everything is sexual. You know what I mean? He tells me that even old flesh is erotic flesh. That disease is the love of two alien kinds of creatures for each other. That even dying is an act of eroticism. That talking is sexual. That breathing is sexual. That even to physically exist is sexual. And I believe him. And we make love beautifully.
Now, I'm not going to pretend that that doesn't sound spaced out, and the shock ending really works, and all of those things. But the essence of it, that embracing of something which is normally found repulsive, that seems really positive. And of course, the very end of the film sees almost everybody transformed. Everybody transformed into a kind of Dionysian, kind of life-living, life-loving people. And they end up in this big swimming pool, making the last remaining hero one of them. And then they walk out, get into their cars, and drive out into the night to spread the message, to spread the word, a brand new cult of love and sexuality and, well, kind of craziness. It's a beautiful film, and I think Barry Norman ought to have given it more time. No offence, because we love Barry Norman, right? But it would have been nice to see a more measured review at the time, rather than 50 years later when everybody thinks it's a classic.